It was one of the strangest coincidences in television history. In 1975, Elizabeth Montgomery stunned audiences when she stepped out of her light-hearted role on Bewitched and into the haunting story of Lizzie Borden. Viewers knew her as the charming witch Samantha Stevens, yet suddenly she was portraying a woman forever linked to one of the darkest mysteries of the 19th century. What no one realized, not Montgomery, not the producers, not even the critics, was that she was not just playing a role. Decades later, genealogists uncovered that Elizabeth Montgomery and Lizzie Borden were blood relatives, connected through a shared ancestor in colonial Massachusetts. Montgomery went to her grave, never knowing the eerie bond. How could one of America's most beloved stars end up embodying her own family's most infamous figure? When Elizabeth Montgomery accepted the role of Lizzie Borden, she was stepping far outside the safe world of television comedy that had defined her career. For nearly a decade, she was beloved as Samantha Stevens on Bewitched, the playful witch whose nose twitch became a cultural trademark. America saw her as charming, glamorous, and endlessly likable. But Montgomery herself feared she was being trapped, destined to be remembered for only one part. She wanted to prove that she was capable of something darker, more demanding, and unforgettable. That chance came in 1975, when ABC offered her the lead in The Legend of Lizzie Borden. It was a stark contrast to the colorful suburban fantasy of Bewitched. The film was brooding, unsettling, and rooted in one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in American history. Montgomery embraced the challenge. Instead of bright humor, she delivered icy restraint. Instead of warmth, she projected ambiguity that kept viewers guessing. The transformation was so complete that critics hailed it as the performance of her career, awarding her an Emmy nomination. The film itself carried its own layer of controversy. American viewers saw a restrained network version, but reports circulated of a more explicit international cut that showed even darker possibilities of what happened in that Fall River house in 1892. For audiences, it was a shock to see a star once associated with light comedy stepping into a role tied to suspicion and violence. For Montgomery, it was the breakthrough she craved, a way to break free from the spell of typecasting. Yet, there was something even stranger than her transformation. Decades later, researchers revealed that Montgomery and Lizzie Borden were distant relatives, connected through a shared ancestor in colonial Massachusetts. She never knew it while filming. To millions of viewers, it was simply an actress disappearing into character. But in truth, she had walked into the shadow of her own family history, without realizing it. Before we can understand why this coincidence continues to fascinate, we need to revisit the case itself, the shocking events that made Lizzie Borden a household name. On the morning of August 4, 1892, the quiet industrial town of Fall River, Massachusetts, became the stage for one of the most notorious mysteries in American history. Inside a modest house on 2nd Street, Andrew Borden and his wife Abby were discovered dead in brutal circumstances. Suspicion quickly fell on Andrew's 32-year-old daughter, Lizzie. The evidence was troubling but far from conclusive. Lizzie gave shifting statements about her whereabouts that morning, sometimes claiming she had been in the barn, other times saying she was ironing. Neighbors testified that relations inside the Borden household had been strained for years. One servant recalled tensions between Lizzie and her stepmother, describing a home thick with resentment. What truly set the investigation ablaze, however, was the story that Lizzie had burned a dress soon after the killings. Some said it was stained with paint, others whispered it bore something more incriminating. Despite these suspicions, the trial that followed shocked the nation. Prosecutors struggled to prove their case, lacking any physical evidence that tied Lizzie directly to the crime. The hatchet presented as the likely weapon carried no blood. Witnesses contradicted one another. Public opinion swayed between outrage and sympathy, with many unable to imagine a well-bred New England woman committing such a crime. When the verdict was announced, Lizzie was acquitted. She walked free, but the shadow of suspicion never lifted. The rhyme children chanted for generations, "Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks," was never a matter of fact. It was folklore, born out of fascination with a case that the courts left unresolved. To this day, no one has been definitively proven guilty. The Borden mystery remains an open wound in American crime history, a puzzle that has resisted every attempt at closure. And yet, what Elizabeth Montgomery brought to the screen in 1975 was not a simple retelling of this grisly tale. She managed to humanize Lizzie in a way that blurred the line between innocence and guilt, leaving audiences to wrestle with the same uncertainty that haunted the jury. But the greatest twist was still hidden. Montgomery was not just playing an infamous woman from history. She was unknowingly portraying her own blood relative. For decades, Elizabeth Montgomery's performance as Lizzie Borden was remembered as one of the boldest pivots in television history. But it was not until years after her death in 1995 that an astonishing detail surfaced. She and Lizzie Borden were not just linked by a role, but by blood. The discovery came from genealogist Rhonda McClure, who specialized in tracing family trees of well-known public figures. In the early 2000s, while researching Montgomery's lineage, McClure uncovered a startling connection. Both Montgomery and Lizzie Borden descended from a man named John Luther, who lived in 17th-century Massachusetts. The link made them sixth cousins once removed. In other words, separated by many generations, they were members of the same extended family. This was not speculation. McClure documented the family tree and published the finding, and the details spread quickly among those fascinated by the Borden case. The revelation cast Montgomery's casting in The Legend of Lizzie Borden in an entirely new light. Had anyone known at the time, the promotional campaigns would have leaned heavily into the eerie coincidence. But Montgomery herself never knew. She took the part to challenge herself as an actress, not realizing that history had quietly scripted a deeper twist. Fans and historians often wonder how she might have reacted to the news. Would it have unsettled her to learn she was playing a distant cousin, accused of one of the most infamous crimes in American history? Or would she have embraced it, seeing it as confirmation that the role had been meant for her all along? We cannot know. What we do know is that the discovery added an uncanny weight to a performance already drenched in mystery. And yet, the way Montgomery played Lizzie Borden was not merely about family ties, it was about craft. The choices she made in front of the camera turned a historical figure into a living, breathing puzzle for audiences. To understand why her portrayal struck such a chord, we need to look at how she crafted a character that was both sympathetic and chilling, sometimes in the very same scene. Elizabeth Montgomery knew that stepping into the shoes of Lizzie Borden meant dismantling everything audiences thought they knew about her. For nearly a decade, she had been the epitome of charm and playfulness as Samantha Stevens, the suburban witch who brought magic to prime time. But in The Legend of Lizzie Borden, she stripped away the warmth and leaned into something far more unsettling. Viewers who expected a familiar smile were met with silence, controlled expressions, and an icy reserve that left them guessing what lay beneath the surface. The genius of her performance was ambiguity. Montgomery resisted easy answers. She never played Lizzie as clearly guilty or clearly innocent. Instead, she hovered in the shadows between the two, forcing the audience to question every glance, every pause, and every flicker of emotion. Critics called it one of her most layered performances because she invited viewers into the uncertainty that defined the real case. Just as the jury had struggled with doubt in 1893, audiences now felt the same weight of indecision. There were moments in the film that pushed boundaries for network television. A scene in which Lizzie is shown undressing before what may have been a killing was unlike anything Montgomery had ever done on screen. While American broadcasts kept the imagery suggestive, international versions reportedly included more explicit sequences, heightening the sense of unease. For fans who had grown up watching Samantha twitch her nose to solve problems, these scenes were almost shocking. But that was the point. Montgomery wanted to prove she could command an entirely different genre, and she succeeded. The impact of her work extended beyond the screen. Today, one of the gowns she wore in the production is displayed at the Lizzie Borden House Museum in Fall River, linking her performance to the very site of the crime. visitors can see it up close, a physical reminder of the way art and history became entangled through Montgomery's role. Her portrayal reframed Lizzie not as a one-dimensional villain or victim, but as a woman trapped in a labyrinth of suspicion, class tension, and unsolved questions. And that choice made the performance timeless. But what truly keeps the story alive is not just one television film. It is the fact that the real house, the setting of it all, still stands today, drawing crowds who want to walk where history unfolded. More than a century after the events of 1892, the story of Lizzie Borden is not confined to books or television screens. It lives inside a house on 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, the very place where Andrew and Abby Borden met their end. For decades, the house has drawn visitors from around the world, eager to stand inside the rooms where one of America's most puzzling mysteries unfolded. It is part museum, part bed and breakfast, and entirely a business built on curiosity. Guests can tour the property by day, or, for the truly daring, stay overnight in the bedrooms that once belonged to Lizzie and her family. The site has become a magnet for speculation. Some visitors come to examine historical artifacts, like the furnishings, crime scene photographs, or even the gown Elizabeth Montgomery wore during the 1975 television film, now displayed as part of the collection. Others come chasing a different kind of story, the persistent rumors that the house is haunted. Local guides are quick to share tales of unexplained noises, flickering lights, or the uneasy sense of being watched. Whether or not one believes in such things, the ghostly reputation has become inseparable from the house's identity, adding to the mystique that keeps it in the headlines. In 2021, the property was sold for nearly $2 million to new owners who promised to continue its legacy as both a museum and a tourist destination. Since then, it has expanded programming, hosting special events on the anniversary of the crime, seasonal tours, and even themed nights that draw both true crime enthusiasts and casual thrill seekers. The business side of the Borden story shows no sign of slowing down. In fact, the competition between Lizzie-themed businesses in Fall River has led to lawsuits and trademark battles, proving that more than a century later, the Borden name is still valuable and still contested. All of this ensures that the legend of Lizzie Borden is not frozen in the past. It remains part of American popular culture, renewed every time a new visitor checks in, every time a ghost story makes headlines, or every time a fresh adaptation hits screens. And that is where Elizabeth Montgomery's performance comes back into focus. Because just as the house keeps the mystery alive, Hollywood keeps reinventing Lizzie Borden for new generations. If the Borden case were just a faded 19th century file, interest might have died long ago. But each generation seems determined to retell it, reshaping Lizzie into whatever symbol the moment requires. Elizabeth Montgomery's performance in 1975 was the first to make her fully human on screen. Since then, filmmakers and showrunners have returned to Fall River again and again, each version adding its own spin. In the 21st century, a wave of new adaptations has kept the story alive. Christina Ricci starred in a cable television film and limited series that portrayed Lizzie with a mix of fragility and menace. Indie films have leaned into the horror angle, transforming the case into gothic drama. And now, one of the biggest names in streaming has placed Lizzie back into the spotlight. Netflix confirmed that the 4th season of Ryan Murphy's monster anthology will center on Lizzie Borden, with actress Ella Beatty taking the role. It is the clearest sign yet that the fascination Montgomery reignited on television nearly 50 years ago has not dimmed. It has only grown. Each retelling shapes public opinion. Some depict Lizzie as a wronged woman trapped in a rigid, patriarchal household. Others portray her as a cold mastermind who slipped through the cracks of the justice system. What remains constant is the uncertainty. Because no court ever proved her guilty, writers and directors have the freedom to paint her however they choose. The result is a character who can be endlessly reinterpreted, from tragic heroine to chilling villain. The fact that new projects continue to emerge speaks to how deeply the case is woven into American mythology. people still debate the evidence, argue theories online, and flock to theaters or streaming platforms to see the story told once again. And when Elizabeth Montgomery's genealogical connection was revealed, it gave those retellings a deeper layer. It was not just that she played Lizzie convincingly, it was that she carried a trace of the same bloodline, unknowingly linking Hollywood fantasy to colonial history. But that coincidence also raises a deeper question, one that lingers long after the credits roll. Why does the discovery of a family tie make the story feel even stranger, even more inevitable than it already was? The discovery that Elizabeth Montgomery and Lizzie Borden were distant cousins struck people as more than just trivia. It felt uncanny, as if history itself had quietly arranged the casting. Humans are wired to see meaning in coincidences, and this one seemed almost too perfect to ignore. An actress desperate to escape a sunny sitcom persona takes on the darkest role of her career, and only later do we learn that the character she portrayed was her own ancestor. It was the kind of twist most writers would not dare invent for fear of being accused of stretching credibility. Yet it was real. The connection raised questions about inheritance, not of wealth or property, but of story. Could traits, struggles, or shadows echo across generations? Of course, there is no evidence that Montgomery shared anything more than a sliver of DNA with Lizzie Borden. Still, audiences love to imagine that performance is more than acting, that somehow the bloodline itself lent Montgomery an insight into the role. Genealogists are careful to say it was simply coincidence. Fans, however, are less cautious. To them, it felt like destiny. This idea of fate and ancestry taps into something larger in American culture. The nation is full of myths about family curses, hidden legacies, and secrets passed down through generations. From New England ghost stories to Southern Gothic tales, Americans have long been fascinated by the notion that the past clings to us, whether we want it to or not. When Montgomery unknowingly stepped into Lizzie's shoes, it was as if art, ancestry, and myth collided in a single moment. The coincidence also deepened the mystery of Lizzie herself. If one of her own relatives could play her with such ambiguity and conviction, perhaps that explained why audiences still struggle to pin down who Lizzie really was. Was she a victim of circumstance, a product of a repressive society, or a calculating figure who took control in the most shocking way possible? The questions never end, and neither does the speculation. And that brings us back to the case itself. Because while culture, television, and genealogy add layers of intrigue, the historical record remains as stubborn and unresolved as it was in 1893. Even now, more than 130 years later, the case of Lizzie Borden refuses to settle. Historians, amateur sleuths, and casual readers still debate the same questions that baffled police and prosecutors in 1892. One theory insists that Lizzie alone committed the crime, pointing to her opportunity, her inconsistent statements, and the burned dress that raised eyebrows. Another argues she was framed by circumstance, that investigators were determined to blame her simply because no better suspect emerged. Some suggest that Bridget Sullivan, the family's maid, may have known more than she admitted, while others whisper that an intruder could have slipped into the house unnoticed. None of these theories have been proven. The trial itself set the tone for every retelling since. Without direct evidence, the jury could not convict. Lizzie was acquitted and lived the rest of her life in Fall River, never far from the whispers that followed her. The rhyme children sang was more powerful than the official record, and folklore soon eclipsed fact. That gap between evidence and legend is precisely what allows filmmakers and writers to return to the story again and again, each shaping Lizzie into something new. Elizabeth Montgomery's portrayal stands apart because of what she did not know. She was not aware of her genealogical link to Lizzie Borden, yet she captured the same ambiguity that defines the case, the space between guilt and innocence, between myth and reality. When the family connection was revealed years later, it only added weight to what had already been considered one of the most daring performances of her career. It felt like proof that some stories are destined to circle back on themselves, no matter how many years or generations have passed. That is why the mystery endures. The facts remain fixed, but the meaning keeps shifting. Each adaptation, each documentary, each whispered theory breathes new life into the question: who was Lizzie Borden really? And was Elizabeth Montgomery's performance simply brilliant acting, or something deeper, written into her own family tree? What do you think? Was it coincidence, or was it fate? If you enjoyed uncovering this strange and chilling overlap of Hollywood and history, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. There are countless more stories where art, life, and legacy collide in ways no one could have predicted.